Siren of Vaulmyrr. Immense force threw Itusark into his harness straps as defensive fire cracked along the boarding craft's hull. Normally his body would have braced instinctively, and he would have felt his enhanced physiology working to keep him conscious and combat-ready, but he was now an iron wraith. He felt himself breathe in, tasting the metallic air of his rebreather, but he knew it was only ghost memory, like the phantom twitch of a hand long replaced by augmetic steel. He was, in effect, dead. He had died. His spirit was now bound within the Lerathal stones embedded in his prey-firm Terminator armor. The ancient relics housed his soul, allowing his will to animate the massive warsuit that had once been his coffin. He flexed his hand inside the gauntlet and wondered if he even retained bones anymore. Or if his corpse was already rotting inside the armor, a walking sarcophagus. The crack in his armor from the wound that had killed him glowed with a deep amber radiance. A molten light pulsed faintly from within the fractured ceramite. "Is that what I am now?" he wondered. A voice crackled through the boarding craft vox. Pod Epsilon! Pod Epsilon! Confirm combat efficiency!" Itusark snapped out of his reverie. By habit he clicked his internal vox. No sound came. His lungs did not move. He cursed silently. He could not speak. Looking around, the other Ember hands hung in their harnesses, arms drifting with the violent motion of the bucking craft. Lumps of frozen crimson floated through the cabin, blood that had vented and crystallized in the cold air. The full squad, 4 battle brothers, all unmoving. Itusark examined his own armor, expecting to see wounds or sealant foam. Instead, a shard of bone was embedded deep in his thigh plate. A matching hole in the pod's hull showed the projectile's path. A Tyranid bone dart. It had pierced the hull but failed to penetrate the Terminator plate. He felt no pain. His heads-up display flickered as he mentally issued the command. Armor integrity, 60%. He gripped the bone spike and tore it free. A sharp amber glow spread through the cracked cataphracta plate. The armor sealed itself from within, molten metal flowing like living iron. No blood, only a scar. Armor integrity, 100%. The vox sputtered again through the pod's noospheric link. "Scouter 4, Pod Epsilon has had it. No one survived that." Itusark could not reply. His muteness, until now merely inconvenient, suddenly felt like a prison. "Roger, Scouter 4, came Caden's voice. "She is still on impact trajectory. Should I initiate self-destruct?" Itusark closed his fist. There was nothing he could do. The vox crackled again with Valkaron's sing-song tone. "Why waste a perfectly good pod? It's not like these Xenos can gather intelligence from it. We will pick it up later." Itusark smiled inside his helm, or at least he felt like he did. The vox signal faded as the Hellblade escort peeled away. "Scoutar 4 moving to cover Pod Alpha." A faint voice followed, perhaps Valkaron again. "Concentrate on that upper tower, the flak battery there is." The rest dissolved into static. Itusark lowered his head and gripped his harness. The proximity lumen began flashing. The servitor pilot stared blankly at the forward screen, a bone shard driven through its chest. Itusark braced. Proximity triggered 7 seconds before impact. 3, 2, 1. The pod slammed into something with a violent shudder. Melta charges detonated in boiling blasts, jets of molten metal burning through the hull ahead. Thud, thud, thud. The armor of the alien ship must have been thin. The pod punched through several layers of organic bulkhead. He expected the final fatal impact. Instead, stillness. Itusark released his restraints and stood. Gravity returned. He looked down at his fallen brothers. Their bodies slumped lifelessly in their seats, so the ship had gravity. He lifted his boarding shield, then his hammer. He was alone. There would be no shield wall. He reached for the buckle holding Chimik's heavy bolter and pulled the weapon free. Slinging a munition pack over his shoulder, he braced it one-handed. Next, he retrieved the melta-gun strapped to Nanoralek's boots. He hung a brace of pyro grenades across his armor. His hand hovered between the storm bolter locked in its case and his old hammer. No, he would not abandon his most trusted weapon. He hefted the hammer and felt something like a smile pass through his thoughts. Then he nudged the door release with the weapon's haft. The pod's built-in heavy stubber roared to life, raking the passage outside. Itusark stepped out. A cluster of gaunts armed with bioweapons darted for cover. Behind them, a larger warrior organism snarled, raising its bone sword toward the drop pod. When it saw Idasirk, it opened its jaws wide, drool dripping from rows of serrated teeth as it lifted a venom cannon. Idasirk fired. Heavy bolter rounds punched into the creature's chest. The warrior staggered backward. The venom cannon exploded in its claws, splashing acid across the nearest gaunts. Idasirk did not break stride. He swung his hammer. The blow smashed the warrior into the fleshy ceiling of the corridor with bone-crushing force. He turned the heavy bolter and cut down the remaining gaunts in a storm of explosive rounds. Silence followed. The corridor was empty. The internal schematic supplied by the Magister's divination made little sense to him. He appeared to be standing within some enormous airway of the living vessel. His external Vox receiver picked up a faint identification signal. He glanced back at the open pod door and nodded once to his fallen comrades. Then he turned and moved into the darkness, following the signal deeper into the alien flesh. On the upper warrens of the bioship, Caden braced as flesh-borer rounds splattered into his pauldron. Gritting his teeth, he stepped into the fire. Rounds slammed into his breastplate, leaving splatters of ichor and bone dripping down his armor. He fired Songmaker. The weapon's tone rose from a deep baritone hum into a piercing, keening frequency. Down the passage, the brood of gaunts that filled the width of the corridor, climbing over one another to fire, were struck by the waves of sound. In perfect lines, the massive Xenos separated, limb from carapace, as if ropes of monofilament wire had been dragged down the passage. The creatures collapsed into a heap of twitching body parts and a spreading pool of ichor. Grand Captain Athanorod moved past him, his preferum armor covering the passage. Kadon opened the Vox. Passage clear. No sign of your team. The signal returned garbled, as if transmitted underwater. Baelgor's voice came through disjointed and muffled. Kadon cursed. Valkaron stepped up behind the boarding party, slapping his Auspex device against his palm. The boarding party is right here. He looked upward to the ceiling where thick veins ran, pulsing with fluids and gases, then down to the floor where rib-like bones braced the corridor. This bioship's layout makes no sense, he said. It is more like moving through arteries than a starship. Athanorod raised a hand. They all stopped. The Praeferum stood motionless, listening through his helm speakers. A dull thudding echoed through the passage. Athanorod leaned closer to the fleshy wall. It pulsed in time with the sound. Valkaron stepped forward, pushing experimentally with his gauntleted hand. The wall pushed back. Oh dear. Athanorod instantly drew his power sword and drove it into the wall. The mucous membrane resisted the blade, steaming as it dissipated the weapon's energy. A Praeferum stepped forward and assaulted the wall with a chain fist. Grease and flesh splattered his armor, but he made little progress. Kadon ordered sharply. Back! He drew Wargbane. The daemon's sword slid through the living wall with unnatural ease. Purple liquid burst outward in a spray, and a power-gloved hand suddenly emerged from the opening, fingers grasping. Valkaron grabbed the hand and hauled. Baelgor tumbled through the opening and collapsed onto the deck, both of them falling amid a torrent of ichor pouring from the wound in the wall. Kadon thrust his arm into the opening, fighting the pressure of the fluid. His gauntlet brushed against something solid. He seized it and pulled. Second Battle Captain Dagvar tore free from the breach. His armor hissed with acid burns, and his once majestic feathered wings were gone. Only the skeletal frame of the harness remained, hanging broken and twisted from his power pack. Athanorod stepped forward and seized Kadon, stabilizing him as the liquid level rose rapidly around their legs. The corridor was already waist-deep. "It's going to flood," he said. "Move," Kadon ordered. The boarding party waited rather than ran up the passage toward the next bulkhead. Athanorod slammed the biojammer onto the door control. The hatch was controlled by a single enormous eye embedded in the wall, the organ glaring at them as the mouth-like barrier refused to open. The device burrowed into the flesh beside it. A blade punched into the Xeno's eye. The door shrieked in agony, and a surge of electrical shock sent the living mechanism spasming open. Athanorod thrust a power fist into the gap, forcing the hatch wider. Kadon dragged Dagvar through first. Baelgor and Valkaron followed. The ichor had risen to their chests now. the Preferum passed through next. Athanarod stepped back, withdrew his fist, and leapt through the opening. The hatch slammed shut behind them. On the far side of the barrier, the corridor was silent once more. Behind the sealed door, the passage slowly filled with dark fluid, carrying with it the floating remains of the gaunts they had butchered. Bone fragments and torn chitin bobbed on the surface until the chamber flooded completely. On the other side, Baelgor tore off his helmet and spat a mouthful of the foul fluid onto the deck. He panted, then grabbed Kadon by the gorget, pulling him closer. "This ship is disgusting," he snarled. He drew a bottle from his belt, uncorked it, and swilled the contents around his mouth before spitting it out across the wall. Valkaran looked between the sorcerer and the second captain. "Where are the rest of your team?" Dagvar took the bottle from Baelgor and poured the liquid over his armor. The acidic ichor hissed as it ran down the plates. "Lost them," he said flatly. Athanarod punched the battle captain square in the chest. "You lump of Grok's dung," he growled. "You let these Xenos eat our only navigator." Dagvar rubbed his breastplate where the power fist had left a four-fingered imprint. "No. Ingasor is alive. Those tentacled things grabbed him." Athanarod shook his helm in open disgust. "Even worse," he said. "You have just given the Xenos a navigator who knows where our bases are. You may have killed us all." Kadon sheathed his sword, then shook the liquid from the tubes of Songmaker. "We are not dead yet, Grand Captain," he said calmly. "And had he been killed, our mission would already be a failure. As it stands, this is merely a setback." Valkaran wiped the Auspex screen clean of fluid and tapped the controls, scanning for human biosigns. He studied the display, then pointed down the passage. "That way." "This misadventure may actually have improved our chances," he continued. "No doubt these Xenos will be taking Ingusor to a primary synapse creature. If so, the marker will be there as well." "That doesn't track," snapped the Grand Captain. "Well, it is the best we have," said Kadon. "We are the only boarding party that made it. Let us move before the hive decides to bring down a horde of claws and teeth upon us." He led the way, Valkaran at his side. The others followed. Armor-mounted lumens flickered on, casting harsh white light down the organic passage as the boarding party advanced deeper into the living ship. The passage ahead trembled. Then, as if seized by some vast internal muscle, the entire tunnel convulsed. A ripple ran the length of it, flesh tightening and relaxing in a rolling wave. All of them braced as the floor and walls undulated in sequence beneath their boots. Dagvar frowned. "It did that before," he said. "Right before the ambush on our boarding team. The passage is reacting to our presence." Valkaran adjusted his auspex, riding the shifting wave of flesh as if he barely noticed the movement. "I believe you may be correct," he said calmly. "The ship's internal musculature is contracting. It appears to be some form of warning signal transmitted through the organism as a whole." He studied the device. "I am detecting large structures moving laterally toward our position." Xedon reached the door ahead. "Large structures?" he asked, fishing a biojammer from his belt. The door's eye blinked slowly at him. He did not like the way it regarded him. Valkaran scanned the surrounding walls. "I believe this bioship possesses some form of internal transport system, tubes or passageways moved by muscular contractions, similar to lifts or conveyor systems. The structures moving are likely being pushed along these organic channels." Baelgor tilted his head. "Like a bowel movement." Valkaran glanced at the sorcerer. "A very succinct analogy," he admitted, "though I might have chosen a more refined one." "Makes sense," said Kadon. "This ship is over 2 miles long. I cannot imagine the crew have to run its length." Athanarod cleared his weapon. "So we have incoming," the Grand Captain said. "We hold our ground and thin the herd before moving on." Dagvar placed a hand on the Grand Captain's stormbolter. "I have found, Big Brother, that a scalpel can often do far more damage than a heavy club, if placed in the correct location." Seaton pressed the clasp on the biojammer. Steel claws unfolded from the device, ready to bite into living tissue. The eye in the wall watched him. It blinked once. "I think I know what the battle captain is thinking," Seaton said. He glanced toward Baelgor. "Go with him. We will continue toward our missing navigator." He looked back to the fleshy eye. Pressing the central stud, a narrow blade extended from the jammer's core, lightning flickering across its tip. The eye stared at the device, then at Caden. It blinked twice. The door opened. Caden clipped the unused jammer back onto his belt and gave the eye a small nod. The eye looked away, staring up at the ceiling as if deliberately ignoring him. They moved through. The team chose the forward path. Dagvar and Balgor turned left. Deep below, in a service corridor that resembled a maze of lung-like tubes, Aetisirc shone his armor-mounted lumen along the walls. Here the damage was obvious. Ruptured hoses, perhaps veins or nerve bundles, hung open, leaking viscous fluids. The ends of several passages had been sealed with a thick resin, hardened into solid blocks. It looked disturbingly similar to an organic form of sealant foam. An idea occurred to him. He was close to the ship's bridge, the area the Hellblades had crippled during their attack. These damaged pipes and cables might be part of a feedback cascade, the biological equivalent of the chain failures that sometimes crippled Imperial warships. But translated into flesh, he reached yet another dead end. The passage was blocked completely by a wall of hardened resin sap. He placed a gauntlet against the surface. It was smooth and cold, almost like glass. Aetisirc withdrew his backup auspex and studied the readings. An apothecary might have understood the data better than he could. To him it made little sense. The structure was not a machine, it was a body. He turned to try another path, and instantly raised his heavy bolter. A brood of gaunts raced past the end of the corridor. He held his fire. One of them turned its head toward him. The lumen beam reflected in the creature's red eyes. It flicked out a long, tasting tongue. Then it looked away. The gaunts scurried after its broodmates. Aetisirc remained motionless as the last of them passed from view, their tails whipping behind them as they fled down the passage. The Iron Wraith slowly lowered his weapon. The corridor around him was empty. There was no possible way the Xenos had not seen him. And yet they had ignored him completely. He stepped forward and removed a servo skull from his belt. Activating its suspensors, he tossed it into the adjoining corridor. The skull bobbed upward and drifted forward. Through his helm display, he watched its picked feed as it followed the retreating gaunts deeper into the maze. Aetisirc moved to the corner and cautiously peered around the fleshy bend, confusion creeping into his thoughts. A sudden sound made him step back. Another gaunt appeared. This one was wounded, dragging a shattered leg as it struggled to keep up with the others. Aetisirc watched the wounded gaunt hobble past the corner. The creature dragged one shattered limb behind it, ichor streaking the fleshy floor as it hurried after its broodmates. Its head turned briefly toward him. Aetisirc did not move. The gaunt paused. For a moment, its red eyes seemed to stare directly into his helm lenses. Then the creature simply turned away and continued down the corridor. The Iron Wraith remained motionless long after it had gone. Curious, he stepped out into the passage. Aetisirc slowly moved to the center of the corridor and stood there deliberately, blocking the way. He waited. Moments later, the brood returned from a side passage, skittering quickly through the organic tunnel. The creatures slowed when they saw him standing in their path. For a heartbeat, they hesitated. Then the first gaunt simply moved around him. It brushed past his armor without reaction. Another followed, then another. One of the smaller creatures stopped beside him. It tilted its narrow skull upward and clambered onto the barrel of his heavy bolter, its claws scraping across the metal casing. The beast hauled itself higher until it stood almost level with his helm. Its eyeless sensory pits faced him. It leaned forward. A long tongue flicked out and tasted the surface of his armor. The creature paused as if considering something. Then it dropped lightly to the deck and scampered away after the others. Aetisirc remained still. Understanding slowly formed within his mind. The gaunts could not perceive him. Their senses, scent, heat, bioelectric signals, psychic presence, found nothing in him. To them he was not prey, not predator, not even an object of interest. He was dead. The Lorethal stones housed his spirit, but the Tyranid senses read only flesh and life. The Iron Wraith possessed neither. Being dead, it seemed, had its advantages. He allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. Then a new shape emerged at the far end of the corridor, a warrior form. The larger Tyranid strode into view, its thick carapace scraping against the living walls. Bone blades flexed along its forelimbs, and its skull turned slowly as it advanced. Idasirk relaxed slightly. If the Gaunts had ignored him, perhaps this creature would do the same. The warrior stopped, its head tilted, its black eyes locked onto his helm. Slowly, deliberately, the Tyrannid raised its bonesword. "Clever," Idasirk said quietly to the beast. The creature's brain was larger, more developed. Perhaps its synaptic link gave it awareness the lesser organisms lacked. It could not smell him. It could not sense life in him, but it recognized the shape of a threat. The warrior shrieked and charged. Idasirk immediately dropped the heavy bolter, letting the weapon fall against its sling. Firing would draw the attention of every creature in the surrounding warrens. Better silence. He stepped forward to meet the attack. The Tyrannid swung its bonesword in a vicious arc. Idasirk caught the blow on his pauldron, the impact ringing through his armor like a hammer striking a bell. The creature lunged again, claws stabbing toward his helm. Idasirk moved inside the strike. His power hammer rose in a short, brutal swing. The weapon crushed the warrior's chest with a wet crack, folding chitin and bone inward. The Tyrannid shrieked and lashed out with its talons, raking across his armor plates. He struck again. The second blow shattered the creature's skull, driving it into the fleshy wall with enough force to split the organic membrane. The warrior convulsed once, then collapsed. The corridor fell silent again. Idasirk stood over the corpse for a moment. Then he retrieved his heavy bolter and continued deeper into the living maze. Idasirk paused. At first he thought it was nothing. A faint sound carried through the organic tunnels. It had not come from ahead, possibly above. In the maze of tube-like passages he could not judge its direction. The ship's interior distorted sound strangely, the soft membranes and pulsing walls carrying vibrations in unpredictable ways. He had taken the noise at first for the airflow, the slow push of gases through the bioship's interior, like the breathing of some colossal lung. But as he listened again, something about it felt wrong. There was a rhythm to it, a cadence, words. Idasirk stepped forward, turning his helm slightly as he tried to judge the direction. His lumen swept along the walls, illuminating the pulsing veins that ran beneath the translucent membranes. There, again, a voice. Fast, frantic, someone speaking. He moved down one passage, but the sound faded almost immediately. Wrong direction. He stopped, turned back, and chose another junction. This passage angled upward sharply. The ceiling dipped so low that even in his Terminator armor he was forced to stoop. The top of his armor scraped against the fleshy roof, producing a soft grinding sound as ceramite brushed against chitinous tissue. Here the voice seemed louder, but distorted, echoing strangely through the biological tubes. Idasirk paused again, listening. The voice blurred, then vanished entirely. Another dead end of sound. He backed out slowly and returned to the junction. Movement flickered at the edge of his lumen. A brood of gaunts skittered past him down one of the passages, claws scratching against the organic floor. They paid him no attention, just as before. Idasirk ignored them. He had grown used to their indifference. He turned his helm again, filtering the ambient sounds through his armor's auditory systems. There, he heard it clearly now. Words, a voice speaking rapidly. Panicked. The sound came from another side tunnel. He followed it, moving carefully through the fleshy maze. The passages twisted and branched unpredictably, forcing him to stop several times and reorient himself as the sound shifted. The voice grew clearer, then clearer still. Now he could understand it. The speaker was babbling in terror. "Please, please, Emperor, preserve me." The voice broke, then continued in desperate gasps. "Dark gods, hear me. Khorne, give me strength. Tzeentch, guide me. Nurgle, spare me. Slaanesh, hide me. Emperor, save me." Idasirk stopped. The prayer continued in frantic desperation. The man was pleading with all four chaos gods, and the Emperor. The words came out in a breathless stream of fear, the voice cracking as the unseen speaker stumbled over the names of gods and masters alike. It was not devotion, it was pure terror. The sound echoed through the living corridors as if the ship itself carried the man's fear through its veins. Idasirk advanced slowly toward the voice. Idasirk followed the sound until the passage ended at a hatch. The eye set into the fleshy wall beside it was dull and gray, the membrane clouded and lifeless. Whatever creature had controlled the door was dead. He reached forward and placed his power-gloved hand against the mouth-like seam. With a grinding shove, he forced the hatch open wider. Beyond it lay a chamber. At first he saw only movement. Navigator Ingusor hung suspended from the ceiling, wrapped tightly in a web-like cocoon of fibrous strands. The navigator struggled weakly against the bindings, his limbs twitching in panic. Beside him hung two other captives. One was a large bovine-like creature, its heavy body sagging in the strands. The other resembled some horned predator, almost tiger-like in shape, with tall, curving horns rising from its skull. Adasark guessed this was some form of holding cell. The hive's larder. In the corner of the chamber lay the corpse of a far larger creature. The Iron Wraith stepped inside and studied it. The thing was grotesque, more squid than insect. Its body was swollen and pale, with dozens of tendrils branching where limbs might have been. Two clusters of bulbous eyes grew from either side of a central sensory tentacle that hung over a circular mouth. The creature was connected to the ship's living walls by thick umbilical tubes and pulsing cords, or it had been. Now those tubes hung limp and dark. The creature was clearly dead. Itusark ignored the navigator's desperate babbling and approached the carcass. He lifted one of the creature's tendrils. The limb flopped loosely in his grip. Dead. He released it. Perhaps this thing had been a link to the local synapse network, or even the node itself. The damage inflicted by the Hellblades might have sent some catastrophic feedback through the ship's biological systems. Looking around the chamber, Itusark formed another theory. This room might not be a prison. It might be a processing chamber, a place where the Tyranids harvested useful genetic material from captured species, DNA, organs, perhaps even gene seed. The warrior organisms would bring living specimens here. Then this creature would take what the hive mind desired. He glanced again at the dead organism. Without it, the warriors might still perform their function. They were likely little more than living tools, biological machines driven by instinct and synaptic command, servitors of flesh. Without a functioning node, they would continue their tasks blindly, unable to adapt. The constant whining behind him finally grated on his nerves. Adasark turned. The navigator was still babbling. Please, please, don't eat me. I'll tell you anything you want to know. Anything. Adasark stepped closer. Ingusor could not see him. Thick strands of webbing covered his third eye and much of his upper face, sealing the navigator's warp sight. But somehow the man sensed the presence of the Iron Wraith. You're there, the navigator gasped. Please, I'll cooperate. I'll tell you anything. Just don't eat me. Itusark was about to rebuke the idiot. Then he remembered. He could not speak. Instead, he raised his hammer and used the bladed edge to slice through the cocoon. The strands parted and the navigator dropped heavily to the floor. Ingusor scrambled frantically, tearing away the remaining webbing. Thank you, he babbled. I swear I'll tell you anything. He pulled the last of the binding strands away from his eyes. Then he saw Itusark. The navigator froze. His face went pale with terror. Ingusor stammered, voice shaking. I was intending to trick them. Itusark slowly shook his helm in silent disappointment. Ingusor pulled the last strands of the web from his void suit. Itusark made a quick series of battle signs to the man. The navigator squinted at him. What's a toilet dwarf? Itusark sagged slightly. For a moment the Iron Wraith simply stared at him, then he slowly repeated the gestures, this time far more carefully. The navigator blinked. Oh. Ingusor rubbed his temples as if trying to reorder his thoughts. The warp node, he said quickly. Yes, I can feel it, the synapse presence, that way. He pointed shakily down one of the branching passages. But shouldn't we evacuate the ship, he continued, voice rising nervously. The team is dead. I saw 2nd Battle Captain Dagvar and Sorcerer Balgor fall into a digestion pool. Itusark stood perfectly still. Behind his helm lenses he considered the statement. Then he considered the reliability of the speaker. The navigator was terrified, half-blind moments ago, and prone to panicked speculation. Itusark slowly raised his hand again and made another short battle sign. Follow. Without waiting for a response, the Iron Wraith turned and began moving down the passage. Behind him, Ingusor hesitated only a moment before scrambling after him. On the upper decks, Valkairon stood watching passively as Kadon and Athanorod pulled at the jammed bulkhead door. This one appeared to have no external control, possibly a security measure. He wondered if it was operated telepathically or by whatever passed for warp interaction among these Xenos. The hatch shifted. Bone plates cracked under the pressure of power gloves. With a tearing sound, the door gave way. Cold air rushed in, blowing the bile stench from the passage. Valkaron waved a hand in front of his helm grill and stepped toward the threshold. Beyond lay a vast open space. It reminded him faintly of a cathedral deck aboard an Imperial warship, though there were no pews, no choir, no sense of order or reverence. Only flesh and bone, grown into towering organic arches. Lying flat on the deck to either side of the doorway were two enormous creatures. Each bore a massive bone shield fused to one arm and crushing pincers on the other. Valkaron noted that on the opposite side of the hatch were matching appendages built into the structure itself. He cleared his breather. Clearly that is why there was no door control, he said. These creatures were the operators. Athanorod kicked one of them. Even in Terminator armor, the bulk barely shifted. He gestured sharply, and the Praeferum moved forward into combat positions, weapons raised. Kadon studied the corpses. "We fought things like these on Vaulmyrr," he said. "Tough, but I see no wounds. I wonder what killed them." Valkaron stepped carefully around a small pool of frozen condensate at the threshold. Ice had formed where atmosphere had vented and flash frozen. He looked out across the chamber. "Void breach," he said. "Automated systems must have sealed the hull, but not in time for these unfortunate creatures." Athanorod swept his lumen across the vaulted hall. "Not just these," he said. Across the chamber, more of the creatures lay dead around a second hatch. His light moved upward. The walls were lined with row upon row of large, egg-like growths, each connected by pulsing umbilicals. In several, half-formed creatures hung suspended, claws outstretched, frozen in the moment of death. "Something tells me this isn't the bridge." "It is a brood chamber," Valkaron replied, checking his scanner. "Or perhaps a barracks. Those eggs are clearly growth pods for new warriors." He tapped the device again. "Not much use now. Vacuum exposure has killed them all." Caden sheathed his sword. "Good," he said. "I was wondering why we were not being swarmed." He walked the length of the hall, stepping carefully around ruptures in the deck where lower passages might lie exposed. At the far wall, a semi-translucent membranous surface stretched from floor to ceiling. Through it, he could see into the deeper structure of the ship. The dorsal spine ran beneath them, shattered in one place, then continuing onward at a slight angle. The damage was clear, the point where the fighters had severed the bioship's nerve spine. Further ahead, elongated tube-like structures, like stretched eggs, ran toward the forward hull. Caden narrowed his eyes. "Spoke too soon," he muttered. "Reinforcements incoming." As he watched, one of the translucent tubes ruptured silently. Its mouth opened to the void, and the organic mass within was violently ejected into space, spinning into the darkness. "Spoke too soon," Valkaron echoed dryly. A second tube convulsed. Its contents halted abruptly, then the entire conduit filled with purple ichor. A third burst apart in a flash of bioplasma as arcs of unnatural lightning tore through it. "Brother Dagvar and Baelgor," Valkaron said with clear amusement. "They do like to make a mess." Thanorod turned back toward them. "At least they are enjoying themselves," he said. "We still have to find this creature of yours." Valkaron slapped the side of his auspex. "I am picking up a single human life sign, possibly two. The readings are fluctuating. 2 decks down, 200 feet forward." He paused, recalculating. "Give or take half a mile." He pointed into the depths of the ship. "Possibly the other boarding team." Kadon shouldered Songmaker. "Then we head for them," he said. "Perhaps they have had better luck finding this creature." Athanorod fell in beside him, his Praeferum forming up around them. "We do not even know what it looks like," the Grand Captain muttered. "We may have already killed it." Valkaron continued adjusting his auspex, a faint smile in his voice. "Oh, I think we will know it when we see it." They moved on. Armor-mounted lumens cast hard white beams as they disappeared into the next passage, leaving the brood chamber silent once more. The dead remained where they had fallen, unseeing, unmoving, forgotten. Deep within the hull, the lone lumen of Itasurk's scarred and pitted Praeferum plate cast a harsh beam down the passage behind him. He looked down with a faint air of resignation, giving a slow, weary shake of his helm. With a breath he intended rather than felt, he leaned forward and extended a gauntlet, gripping the navigator's void suit and hauling him up from the ichor-filled pit into which he had fallen. Ingusor staggered upright, his body shaking as he tried to wipe the fluid from his visor, only succeeding in smearing it into an opaque film. Atusark glanced back down the darkened passage, confirming it was clear. Satisfied, he propped his heavy bolter against the fleshy wall and pulled the tabard from his armor, wiping away the worst of the Xenos ichor. Ingusor turned back toward him, shielding his eyes from the Terminator's lumen. "Sorry," he stammered. "I missed my step." Atusark responded in battle sign. "I told you. Follow my footsteps." Ingusor glanced nervously around the passage. Piles of dead gaunts lay scattered about, some still smoldering, their broken forms twitching faintly as residual nerve impulses died away. He nodded quickly. Atusark retrieved his heavy bolter, ejected the spent ammunition drum, and locked his last magazine into place. He pulled back the charging slide with a heavy clack, then gave a single, decisive nod. The gaunts had not attacked him. They had gone for the navigator. He considered, briefly, whether leaving the man behind might be the wiser course. But the creature was guiding him, leading him toward the source of the signal. Reluctantly, he turned and moved on. Behind him, Ingusor fumbled in the viscous fluid, eventually retrieving his own lumen device. He rose unsteadily and followed, doing his best not to look too closely at the bodies that lay scattered along the passage. Their lifeless eyes reflected his torchlight as he passed. Atusark moved onward, his huge, bulky armor making almost no sound as he advanced with the careful precision of a seal hunter in his youth. Behind him, Ingusor clanked and clattered, his equipment knocking and bouncing as he stumbled and leapt between living flesh tendrils and the small, crawling things that scuttled along the walls, some form of maintenance organism, no doubt. "I am a navigator," Ingusor whispered to himself, far too loudly. "From a proud family. I have station, a rank to be respected." He sniffed indignantly, then yelped as he tripped over a vein-like pipe. Atusark shook his helm, resisting the urge to discipline the man. Ingusor suddenly stopped, clutching his third eye. Then he began moving faster, stumbling forward until he reached the iron wraith. "It's close," he gasped. "It's loud." Atusark halted, bracing as he raised his weapon toward the passage ahead. A doorway stood there, buckled half-closed, clearly damaged during the space battle. He was no psyker, but like all his people, he could sense those touched by never space. He had heard the shaman speak of it, of colors that had sound, of thoughts that echoed like thunder. He raised a silencing hand, then gestured. "Distance?" Ingusor clutched his visor with both hands, breathing hard. "It's calling," he whispered. Atusark signed again. The navigator lowered one hand, nodding. "It can sense our presence." Atusark considered that. It made sense. The creature would be some form of telepath, maybe a psyker of sorts. He exhaled, then stepped forward through the hatch. His heavy bolter cleared the doorway first. The Tyranid warriors waiting in ambush struck instantly. Bone blades flashed. One embedded itself into the breech of the bolter. The second sheared the muzzle clean away. Ambush. Atusark reacted without hesitation. Captain Dagvar had drilled this into him. The ways of war in the 35th millennium, lessons shaped by Asterlin and the harsh traditions of the Thulathi. Where tribesmen might withdraw, the Ember hands attacked into it. He surged forward, dropping the ruined heavy bolter as he charged. A blade struck his Terminator armor as he crossed the threshold, the impact cracking against ceramite. He swung his hammer, igniting its power core mid-strike. The blow crushed the first warrior into the wall with bone-shattering force. With his free hand, he seized the bonesword of the second creature, crushing bone and sinew in his grip as his reinforced servos whined. Then he brought the hammer around again. The second warrior's chest collapsed under the impact. The creature clung to him even as it died, its jaws snapping onto his helm. Teeth shattered against the armor as it tried to bite through. Atusark headbutted it. The impact crushed its skull inward. He kicked the corpse free, sending it tumbling across the fleshy floor. He scanned the chamber, just in time. A deafening shriek split the air. One of the great monsters, massive, heavy, unstoppable, charged him from across the chamber. A carnifex. 4 scything talons aimed directly at him. Atusark moved instantly. He drew Brother Nanaraluk's melt-a-gun from his belt and primed it with a flick of his thumb. There was no time to adjust the output. He fired at full charge. The weapon unleashed a blast of invisible heat. The Carnifex took the full force of it. For a moment the creature continued forward, then its armor began to fail. Chitin cracked, then sloughed away as the heat liquefied its mass. The monster staggered, collapsed. Its limbs folded beneath it as it crashed to the deck in a smoldering ruin. Atusark dropped the spent melta and hefted his hammer once more. Behind him, Ingusor stood frozen, staring at the three corpses in shock. Slowly, the navigator lifted his gaze, then looked past Atusark. All three of his eyes widened in terror. Atusark groaned inwardly as he turned. The chamber was strewn with dead forms, most of them ruptured by the feedback surge that had torn through the ship's systems. Bodies lay split open, ichor pooled across the deck, and the air carried the thick, metallic stench of cooked flesh and burst organs. In the center of the room, it waited. Suspended within a vast, vat-like basin of oozing, semi-translucent fluid, the creature loomed. Thick vein lines and pulsing umbilicals ran from its swollen mass into the surrounding walls, linking it directly to the living structure of the ship. Many of those connections had ruptured, their contents leaking into the vat in slow, bubbling streams. The creature itself was grotesque, bloated, vast. Its body sagged like a colossal slug, its pale, blubbery flesh rippling as it struggled to move. Sections of its bulk were swollen and split where internal pressure had built during the feedback cascade, leaking dark ichor into the surrounding fluid. Across its body protruded clusters of interface spikes, bone and chitin needles embedded deep into its own flesh. Some were broken, others still pulsed faintly, flickering with residual energy as they attempted to maintain their connection to the dying systems of the bioship. Its underbelly shifted sluggishly, folds of flesh dragging through the liquid as it tried to turn toward Atusark. At the front of the mass, a lipless mouth opened. A long, curling tongue extended from it, slick with fluid, coiling around one of the remaining interface cables. It worked at the connection obsessively, as if trying to reattach or repair it, driven by instinct even as the organism around it failed. Then the eyes found him. Dozens of them. Clustered across its head and upper body, opening one by one, each fixing upon him with unnatural focus. There was no confusion in them, no animal instinct, only cold, directed awareness and hatred. Atusark hefted his hammer, activating the power field. It sparked to life, arcs of lightning dancing across the head of the weapon and reflecting from the slick, slime-coated walls. This would be easier than he had expected. The synapse node creature was already largely disconnected from the ship's systems. All he would need to do was sever the remaining veins and umbilical cables, though he did wonder briefly how they were supposed to get such a thing back to the Perfuga. The creature continued to regard him with its many eyes. He could sense intelligence behind that gaze, not the distant guiding will of the hive mind, but something more local, a mind capable of thought, of reaction, perhaps even of curiosity. Then he realized something. He had been hearing it for some time, only now did it fully register, a sound, a presence. It filled his mind like background noise, constant, pervasive. He had been vaguely aware of it since he first boarded the bioship, but only now did he recognize it for what it was. A voice, a song. Atusark remembered conversations with the Void Mariners of the Carvansari trade fleets, old tales shared in the long dark between stars. He recalled, too, the half-mad stories told by heretic crews they had encountered. They spoke of things in never space that called to voidsmen, voices that sang, voices that lured ships from their course, drawing them toward unseen hazards, like vessels wrecking themselves upon the metaphorical shoals of the immaterium. He had always taken such tales for superstition. Now, it made sense. Perhaps creatures like this were the origin of those stories. The hive's communication was not silence. It was song. That was how the Xeno's friend or foe system functioned. The ships sang to one another. Ingusor stepped up beside him, no longer covering his third eye. He swayed slightly, as if intoxicated, his expression distant and unfocused. "Siren," he whispered. Atusark turned his helm toward him. Then, slowly, he took a step forward. His boot stuck. For a moment, Atusark thought it had caught on the slick, adhesive floor. He pulled, but it did not move. He looked down. Nothing held it. He pulled harder. Servos groaned as he forced himself a single step forward. Then his other boot locked in place. A keening sound rose around him, high, piercing. He turned his helm toward the creature. Its many eyes were still fixed upon him, but the sound was not coming from it. Idasirk looked to his side. Ingusor had dropped to his knees, the navigator's head tilted back, all three eyes wide open. Drool spilled from his slack mouth as a constant, whining, keening sound poured from him. Atusirk made a sharp battle sign. The navigator did not respond. Atusirk tried to take another step toward the creature. The hive siren was doing this, a psychic attack. His feet remained fixed. His hammer lowered slowly, dragged down by an invisible weight. It felt as if gravity itself had increased, pressing down upon him. His armor felt impossibly heavy, immovable. He looked again into the creature's clustered eyes. The weight increased. The hatch at the far side of the chamber shattered open. A pair of hammers smashed through the bone plating. Atusirk turned as two Praeferum Terminators forced their way inside, stepping over the corpses of the guards that had died during the battle. He tried to warn them, tried to shout, but as an iron wraith he remembered, he could not speak. Athanorod strode through the breach, his helm turning toward the creature in the vat. He gave a single, measured nod and signaled his warriors. The Praeferum took up combat stances. Valkaron entered behind them, standing slightly apart, lowering his axe as he regarded the thing. "What a marvelous abomination," he said. Kadon followed, his gaze moving from the creature to the console. "You find the strangest things fascinating," he said flatly. Then, more sharply, "Athanorod, cut those cables, disconnect that thing." Athanorod did not move. Valkaron tapped his auspex, then struck the side of the device as the readings fluctuated wildly. "This must be it," he said. "Readings are off the scale." Kadon rested his hand on Songmaker, covering the creature with its arc but showing no outward fear. "Athanorod," he said again, "move." The Grand Captain stood unmoving, green eye lenses fixed upon the creature. His Praeferum remained in position, one step forward, then halted. The warrior looked down at his own boot. Slowly, his helm tilted toward the siren. Sidon shook his head slightly. "That sound," he muttered. "Vox interference." Valkaron stepped closer to the vat. "Fascinating," he whispered, "a true siren of myth." His voice carried a note of reverence. The siren was never intended to wreck ships. It is simply a signal, a call to its kin. The wrecks, merely a byproduct. He gestured toward the creature. All bioships must possess a song, a psychic waveform that identifies them, a collective choir operating beneath the immaterium's surface layer. He sounded almost awed. These Xenos possess a beautiful understanding of the warp. Sidon turned his helm toward him in disbelief. Then he raised a gauntlet to his own helm, steadying himself. He brought up Songmaker, then let it fall. "Athanorod, Valkaron, fight it." He drew Wargbane. Holding the blade toward the creature, he forced himself forward and slashed through one of the remaining cables. The hive siren recoiled. Valkaron, Athanorod, and the Praeferum convulsed violently. One of the Praeferum clutched his helm and collapsed, blood spilling from shattered eye lenses. Atusirk felt the psychic shockwave hit him like a physical blow. He dropped to one knee. Beside him, Ingusor collapsed entirely. Atusirk tightened his grip on his hammer. Across the chamber, Kadon staggered. Wargbane slipped from his grasp. His trembling hand reached for his bolt pistol, dragging it free with visible effort. But he sagged, dropping to his knees, unable to raise his arm. The creature watched them. Its many eyes blinked slowly. Its tongue moved, curling around the severed cable, trying to reattach it, driven by instinct even now. Atusirk strained against the weight pressing him down. Valkaron's voice echoed faintly through the chamber. A fascinating adaptation, a void-dwelling species calling to its brethren for comfort. The chamber shook. From the passage behind them came the heavy, unmistakable tread of power armor. Atusirk turned his helm with effort. He knew that sound. Baelgor and Captain Dagvar burst through the ruptured hatch, ichor slick and battle-worn, their armor scorched and dripping with alien filth. Dagvar moved first, always the warrior. His axe was already raised, his stride long and purposeful as he took in the chamber in a single glance. His eyes locked onto the creature in the vat. Baelgor followed a half-step behind, his staff already glowing with gathering warp light, the air around him distorting as he drew power. Itasirk tried to warn them, tried to raise a hand, tried to shout. But no sound came. He could only watch. Caden saw them. "Stop!" he roared, forcing the word out through the crushing psychic pressure. "Do not!" Too late. Dagvar charged. He roared a challenge, driving forward with all the unstoppable force of an Astartes assault, his axe sweeping up in a killing arc. Baelgor unleashed the warp. Lightning tore from his outstretched hand, crackling through the air toward the siren, reality itself warping around the strike. For a fraction of a second, it worked. The creature recoiled, its many eyes tightening, its vast bulk shuddering within the vat. Then the song changed. The psychic pressure spiked. Dagvar faltered mid-stride. His armor screamed as the invisible weight crushed down upon him. His charge slowed, then stopped entirely, his muscles locking as if turned to stone. Baelgor's lightning flickered, then died. The sorcerer staggered, his connection to the warp collapsing under the overwhelming psychic interference. He dropped to one knee, clutching his helm as the song tore through his mind. Both of them were held, pinned in place, like the others. Itasirk strained, trying to move to reach them. Then the siren pulsed again. A sharp, focused surge. One of the Preferum Terminators jerked violently. For a split second he stood rigid. Then his helm exploded. Ceramite shattered outward in a violent burst, fragments and blood spraying across the chamber as the warrior collapsed lifelessly to the deck. Silence followed, heavy, oppressive. Only the siren song singing under the immaterium's membrane. Dagvar remained locked in place, axe still raised, his body trembling against the unseen force. Baelgor sagged, breathing hard, the last traces of warp energy bleeding away from his gauntlet. Across the chamber, Caden fought to lift his weapon, his movements slow, labored, as if the air itself had turned to stone. The creature watched them all, blinking with intelligent eyes. Itasirk wanted to scream. He was held, immovable, crushed beneath an invisible weight, as though gravity itself had turned against him. Beside him, Ingusor's third eye flickered. Itasirk turned his helm toward the navigator. The man's lips moved as he convulsed under the psychic pressure. Itasirk focused. What had he said? Ingusor blinked, once, twice, 3 times, then rolled one of his eyes toward his outstretched hand. Itasirk followed the gesture. The navigator's gloved hand was moving. Battle sign. Armor. Shield. Armor shield? What did he mean? Or had the wretched man finally gone mad? Itasirk felt his breathing falter, though it was only the memory of breath. He looked to the others. Baelgor was on his knees, one hand clutching a half-drawn bottle. Valkaron stood murmuring happily to himself. Dagvar and Caden both strained visibly, their armor creaking under the effort to move. Battle sign. Ingusor was no Astartes, not even a warrior. In Iron Hand's battle sign, armor meant vehicle, dreadnought. In Thulathi sign, hard meant stone, rock. Shield could mean a physical barrier, or, in Iron Hand's usage, an energy field. What had he meant? Then it came to him. The Larithal stones, embedded in his armor, the glowing relics that bound his spirit to the shell of his warsuit. He looked back to the navigator. Ingusor's drooling lips still moved. Itasirk understood. He strained. Every servo in his armor screamed as he forced his arm to move. Slowly, inch by inch, he raised his hammer toward his own chest. The siren's song filled his mind, pressing down, drowning thought. Closer, closer. The hammer touched his chest plate, just above one of the embedded spirit stones. It glowed amber. Itasirk triggered the power field. Lightning erupted from the hammer's head, arcing directly into his armor. Energy cascaded across the ceramite, racing over the surface and into the Lirathil stones. They flared, brilliant, alive. The pressure broke. Itasirk dropped to one knee, catching himself with one hand as the weight lifted from him. He looked up. All of the creature's eyes were fixed on him. He grunted and charged. The hammer swung. It smashed into a thick, pulsing cable, rupturing it in a spray of ichor that splattered across his armor. He swung again. Another cable parted. Behind him, a Preferum staggered, then shook his head clear, drawing his pistol and opening fire into the nearest tendrils. Itasirk struck again. Dagvar roared as he surged forward, his axe cleaving through a tether. The severed cable snapped back, whipping across the chamber and knocking Valkaron from his feet. Another blow, another cable crushed. Caden seized Wargbane and swept it in a brutal arc, severing 2 more umbilicals in a single strike. Athanorod stepped forward, Stormbolter roaring as he tore apart the remaining connections. Baelgor, still on one knee, uncorked his bottle and flung its contents across the nearest cables. The liquid ignited instantly, warp fire crawling along the fleshy conduits as they burned. The siren convulsed. Its vast body writhed in the vat, sending thick waves of fluid sloshing across the deck. Its tongue lashed wildly, grasping for connections that no longer held. It screeched. Valkaron, lying on his side, reached out with his power glove and crushed one of the last remaining cables. With his other hand, he raised his gold-plated bolt pistol and fired point-blank into the final tether. The song stopped. The vast, oppressive chorus of warp sound collapsed into silence. Only a faint residual hum remained. The creature sagged. Severed from the hive mind, it curled inward, its bloated form folding upon itself. Its stubby tail flicked weakly as it rocked in its own slime-filled vat. Its many eyes closed. Atusark stood over it, hammer in hand, his armor coated in ichor. Valkaron stepped beside him, looking down at the creature with open fascination. "It appears we have our identification device," he said, wiping slime from his tabard. "Truly fascinating." Atusark gave a short nod. He saluted Caden, then stepped aside. Ingasor lay on the floor nearby, shaking his head weakly, dazed but alive. Atusark extended a gauntlet. He pulled the navigator to his feet, then placed a heavy, almost gentle hand on the man's shoulder. He made a final battle sign. "Well done." They worked quickly. There was no ceremony to it, no reverence for the dead, only the urgency of survival. Beyond the drifting wreckage of the battle, the hive fleet was already reforming, vast shadows sliding through the void as the living armada turned toward them. Every minute lost meant the swarm closing another 1,000 kilometers. Within the hour, Kadon had issued his orders. Captain Halatrax was to take the Karabath Zarlight and make for open void. The ancient gunship had been built for gunnery duels and discreet smuggling rather than speed or elegance, but she still possessed powerful engines and thick armor. She would take aboard the entire expedition team and every crew member not essential to the operation now unfolding. Naman Sul oversaw the loading personally. Great sealed reliquary crates were moved under armed watch into the holds of the Zarlight, containing the shattered remnants of the Lyraethal tree. Wrapped within those relic fragments lay the gene seed of every Ember hand who had fallen on Vaulmyrr. Whatever happened next, Sul had sworn those precious organs would return to Carvansari. While the Zarlight prepared for departure, the Perfuga was made ready. The huge cargo cranes along the freighter's spine swung outward like skeletal limbs. Winch cables and grav tethers snaked through space and latched onto the drifting carcass of the most intact Tyranid bioship from the battle. The thing looked like a flayed whale. Dead chitin hung in ragged plates. Ruptured sacks leaked cloudy vapor. A torn section of the creature's abdomen exposed coils of pale intestine that drifted slowly in the vacuum like obscene banners. The cranes dragged it in. Athanorod and his boarding teams went to work immediately. Power cutters howled as Astartes carved into the creature's belly, tearing out the remaining organs with brutal efficiency. Vast sacks of glandular tissue were hauled free and dumped into the void, where the destroyer Cinderoath and the frigate Emberfall blasted them apart with contemptuous macrofire. What remained was a hollowed corpse. Meanwhile, the Dark Mechanicum corvette Pyre of Quietus, under Baelgor's supervision, moved in close to begin the more delicate work. Cables and injector probes were driven into the dead biovessel, while the Mechanicum adepts chanted Binharic canticles through vox grills thick with incense smoke. The task was not merely butchery, it was deception. They began to rewrite the corpse. Energy signatures from the Perfuga were masked and rerouted through the alien flesh. Reactor emissions were disguised as sluggish organic heat blooms. Plasma exhaust was fed through swollen gas bladders so that it vented like biological propulsion. Air ducts were threaded into the hollowed breathing tubes of the creature, pumping vapor and chemical haze through the carcass so that distant scans would read it as living respiration. To augur arrays, it would appear as hearts beating, lungs breathing, and glands cycling bioplasma through alien arteries. Valcaron oversaw the entire grotesque operation with clear enthusiasm. At one point, he insisted a still-twitching nerve bundle be wired directly into the freighter's power grid for authenticity, which caused 3 tech thralls to seize violently before someone disconnected it again. Once the internal cavities were cleared, Irilta brought the Perfuga slowly forward. The freighter slid nose first into the corpse like a parasite entering a carcass. Crane arms locked chitin plates into place along the hull, bolting and welding them through layers of bone-hard carapace. Grav tethers dragged long tendrils across the freighter's flanks, securing them over heat baffles and engine ports. Ruptured gas bladders were stitched across the stern, so leaking vapors would disguise the burning wake of the drives. The result was grotesque. Where once the Perfuga had been a brutal industrial freighter of rusted armor and cargo cranes, now it appeared as a swollen tyrannid organism drifting among its own kind. From a distance, it looked almost convincing. Up close, it looked like someone had attempted to dress a battleship in the carcass of a sea monster. Valcaron regarded the finished work with quiet pride. Sorny stared at it through the bridge viewport, her expression one of exhausted disbelief. "It looks," she said slowly, "like a drunk grox tried to disguise itself as a whale, but it will fool the hive mind." Beyond the glass, the Perfuga drifted, now wrapped in its grotesque stolen skin. Itusurk stood on silent watch upon the bridge, overseeing the work below. His helm turned slightly as Valcaron caught his eye. The Iron Wraith gave a single, measured nod. Seated in the vacant navigator's throne, a woolen cloak wrapped about his shoulders, Ingusor cradled a steaming mug between bandaged hands. He blew gently across the surface, then smiled faintly toward his unlikely guardian. His third eye opened, blinking, listening, to the Perfuga's own siren song.